Good evening, everyone. Thank you for logging on to this online training for the NParks Garden Bird Watch April 2021. We will be starting shortly. For those who haven't taken part in the poll, you could, help us to fill in your responses by clicking on the poll button at the bottom of your screen. For those who have, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Yeah. We will be starting shortly. Please note the following. This session will be recorded. The recording will be made available via a YouTube link. The NParks and the NUS Office of Environmental Sustainability, both of us are co-organizing this event, may use the images and videos in their publications, digital platforms, and marketing channels. Please remember to mute your audio. And if you like, switch on your video for a more fun and interactive session. Yeah, please also feel free to type your questions in the chat function below. Kindly note that there will not be a live Q&A segment at the end of the session, but instead NParks will collate all your questions and answer them in a FAQ compilation that will be emailed to you together with the training notes, which will be shared later on by our speaker from NParks. Yeah. When viewing your shared screen, please also choose the side-by-side mode so that you can both see the speaker as well as the slides and videos at the same time. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, just give us a couple of minutes and I will introduce the speaker and the trainer for this evening. Hello again. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Amy from the NUS Office of Environmental Sustainability. As you know, our office role is to promote awareness and action on campus sustainability and to enhance the sustainability culture within the NUS communities of students and staff. We're very happy to see so many of you this evening. It just shows the interest that you have in this citizen science program. Yeah, I also like to acknowledge the partnership of NParks. In fact, this is the event that the Garden Bird Watch is an event that is part of the Community in Nature Biodiversity Watch series. Yeah. Please also note that the practical training session, which was scheduled to be conducted at the Singapore Botanic Gardens has been cancelled. The practical training session has been cancelled due to capacity constraints. So we apologize for that, but our NParks colleague here will be sharing some of the tips which would typically be communicated at the practical training session. She'll be sharing some of it later this evening in her slides. Yeah, kindly also note that after you've completed the Birdwatch survey, which can be carried out anytime between the 10th and the 18th of April, and after you've submitted the results, we will then proceed to select a lucky draw winner. The prize is a pair of binoculars. We hope that with this pair of binoculars, you can participate in more biodiversity watches in the future. So do look out for the announcement sometime in May. The winner will receive an email from us. We also share the hopefully some of the pictures that you submitted on the OES Facebook and Instagram pages. Yeah. Once again, please ensure that your microphone is muted. Yeah. I'll like to then introduce Ms. Sabrina Tang, who is the manager from the National Biodiversity Center Division of NParks. She will be sharing with us how to identify the common birds in Singapore, as well as walk us through the survey methodology. She's a very engaging speaker and trainer, so we hope we know that you'll enjoy her sharing. And as mentioned earlier, please type in your questions in the chat function below, and she will answer, she and her colleagues will answer all these questions at the end of the session by compiling your answers and sending it to you in the next email that you'll receive. Okay, without further ado, please welcome Sabrina Tang.
Okay, so hello everybody. Just give me a little while I share my presentation. Okay, so I hope everybody can see the screen. So welcome to our Garden Bird Watch training for April survey. So this is a collaboration that NUS actually began with us as part of our larger offerings of citizen science initiatives. So I once again want to firstly apologize that we've had to cancel the practical session. As you know, safe distancing and safe management measures are still quite prevalent now, and certain factors out of our control have prevented us from doing the practical session. So once again, my sincerest apologies. So another thing I want to thank everybody is for joining this session on a weekday night. I know a lot of you might find your weekday nights as very precious time. So I really want to thank you guys for coming and joining us over Zoom. Okay, so without further ado, let me just reiterate some of these classroom rules. So please type your questions out in the chat function and type it out to everybody instead of just PMing me or one of the NUS staff. We will not be answering questions during this session, but it will be compiled and sent to you in the interest of time. We find this format a little bit faster, and we can answer your questions actually in more detail as well. So we will be doing this for this Zoom session. And once again, I'm very, very sorry, but no worries. As Amy has earlier mentioned, I'll be sharing more tips and tricks with you on how to spot our feathered friends during this training session instead. And actually, from a lot of my volunteers' feedback, sometimes people can't make it for the practical session last minute. They said they were able to do the survey quite well, even without the practical session. So no worries on that. And once again, if you have any questions, please do type out in the chat. We will compile them as a frequently asked questions document and send it out along with your training notes and some other information. Okay, so lesson content. Another thing is that if you see a little star on the side of the slide, these will be sent to you. No worries if they are not sent to you, as this recording will be made available to you later on via NUS Office of Environmental Sustainability's YouTube channel. So introduction. So what is Garden Bird Watch? So Garden Bird Watch, as the name suggests, is a bird watching initiative that happens in our parks and gardens. It also happens in April and November, so twice a year. And this is because we have different types of birds that only visit Singapore in certain times of the year. So this is part of their migratory season. And that's the November session. But for the April session, we have more of our native birds who are more obvious because it's actually breeding season for a lot of these birds. It's a community-based effort that basically allows us to collect more data about our bird species and their distributions. And we will basically do this by identifying and counting the birds in an allocated area. So most of you will be assigned an area in southern Singapore. Some of you might have requested a site further away, and we will try to match the sites up with your request as far as possible. Okay. So we want to improve our participants' awareness of our local biodiversity and some of the conservation measures that we're doing. And this whole process is basically what is known as citizen science. So citizen science basically gives some power to the layperson who might not be directly a scientist, directly a conservationist. Although I'm very sure some of you might already be, since NUS has quite a strong research and conservation history. So yeah, I hope all of you will enjoy this session as well. So now we'll just go through the very broad timeline of Garden Bird Watch. So now we're in the preparation phase, which you're doing now. You're participating in our training, and hopefully after this training, you have a little bit of time to do some self-practice, as the actual survey window only begins on 10th of April. So the site allocation is sent via email. And my apologies here. So 10 April is actually a Saturday, not a Friday. So site allocation will be sent via email, and your surveys will begin during this time frame. So the last stage of this is actually your result submission. So your result submission will be done by an online form, and your results must be submitted before the 1st of May, which is actually around, you have a little bit more than a week after your survey period ends to go and submit the results. Likewise, if you are unable to complete your survey or you have some issues with your results, you can always contact our team and I'll provide you the contact details later on. Okay, so we're going to start off with a very broad overview of birds and their roles in our ecosystem. So if any of you are like ornithologists or conservation biologists and like, hey, this is too simple, it's okay. This is actually targeted at beginners, so we want to make it very easy to understand for everybody. Okay. So one main thing birds do, as many of you might have observed, is that they eat fruit. So why this is important is because birds actually act as seed dispersals by eating this fruit, and what goes in must of course come out, and as the bird flies to another location, it will actually pass the seed out, and then the seed will germinate in another location further away from the parent tree. Why this is important is because it allows the tree to basically spread its genetics, as well as for the baby tree not to have the competition, because you know when there's a lot of plants clustered together, they find it difficult to grow, not to have competition for its parent tree. So one very important role of birds is actually seed dispersal. Okay, so here, this bird picture here is an oriental pied hornbill. We'll be learning more about them later on. So another thing that birds do, which is also related to plants and trees, is pollination. So as you can see here, this olive-backed sunbird female actually has a lot of pollen on her beak. And why this is so is because olive-backed sunbirds are actually nectarivores. So nectarivorous birds means that they drink nectar. That's one of their main sources of food. And because of that, when they're dipping their beak into the flower, they actually get pollen stuck across their face. And why this is important is that as they flip from flower to flower, the pollen will actually transfer and fertilize another flower somewhere else. And this kind of starts the cycle all over again, because you need pollination to happen before a flower can bear fruit and seed as well. So birds play that very important link that's often overlooked. Even though when you think pollination, you think insects, birds actually do play this important role as well. So another thing that birds do is actually nest excavation, and not all birds do this. So here we have a pair of woodpeckers. So woodpeckers, as the name suggests, they peck on wood. So this process actually is done by them when they need to build nests. So they'll kind of excavate a nest hole, and then they will actually lay their eggs and raise their young inside. And once the young fledges, the hole is still left there. And this is important because it adds a layer of structural complexity, basically makes the habitat more complex. So other animals can actually use these nesting holes after the bird family has fledged. So because of this, without birds like this, you have a lot less opportunities for other animals to use these holes, and they actually do contribute to the overall diversity of a area. So, yeah. And then lastly, what people also forget is that birds can be predators as well. So here I have actually a photo of a white-bellied sea eagle juvenile. So this juvenile white-bellied sea eagle is actually spotted by one of my friends in Marina Bay Financial Center. And as the name suggests, the white-bellied sea eagle actually is found near water sources. So Marina Bay Financial Center, very near Marina Barrage, very near like the open sea as well. And they are predators who mostly eat fish, but will also take other animals such as reptiles and small rodents as well. So this juvenile sea eagle, thankfully, it wasn't injured or anything. It was actually, it just perched on the side of the office building. And if you can see, it's actually quite a large bird. So this waste paper basket here is actually an A4 size waste paper basket. And the bird, even though it's a juvenile, is much quite a bit larger than it. So this was a very interesting close encounter one of my friends had, and I'm very glad that he chose to share the information with me so I can show it to all of you guys. So predatory birds are also important because without predators, your populations of prey animals would be too much, and it will kind of cause the ecosystem to kind of collapse. Okay, so now we'll be going on to physical characteristics. So physical characteristics, why we want to go through this. So how would you describe, like for example, how would you describe me? You describe me as a lady with like medium length hair that's slightly wavy and dark brown or black. So same thing when we want to give our participants the vocabulary to be able to describe the birds that they see well, even though they might not be able to identify the birds immediately. So the description will kind of help us help you to figure out what birds you might have spotted if you can't get a clear photo, or if you can't basically can't identify them otherwise. Okay. So the first thing we'll be talking about is patterning and sheen. So patterning and sheen, as the description suggests, is actually patterns, and sheen actually means how, like for example, how a material, in this case bird feathers, reacts to light that hits it. So we'll be talking about patterning first. So for patterning, firstly we have striation. So striation actually means parallel stripes to the bird's body. So the stripes go parallel to the direction of the bird's body, as you can see on this bird over here. Another type of stripes that birds have is barring. So barring, instead of being parallel, it goes perpendicular to the bird's body. So this is kind of like comparable to zebra stripes or even tiger stripes. So this is kind of like what this owl over here has, barring. On this owl, we also have spots. So spots is quite self-explanatory. The spots can be any color and any size, and on any part of the bird's body. So this owl actually is spotted wood owl, and it has some spots on its wings here. Okay. Lastly, we have scaling. So scaling is unique because it's the effect of fish scales when each of the bird's feathers individually is outlined in a different color. So because of this, that's why we call it scaling, because when they overlap, they give the effect of fish scales. Okay. So these are some of the basic terms I'm talking about when we're talking about patterning and sheen on the bird's plumage. Now we'll talk about sheen specifically. So here is gloss. So gloss basically means the feathers are very, very shiny when the light hits them. Most birds, as you can compare to the one next to it, have a more matte, kind of like not so shiny finish. So it's not glossy, but this one is very, very glossy. And another sheen that we can talk about is iridescence. So iridescence is actually structural coloration. What that means is that when the light hits the bird's feathers, the feathers reflect in different ways, different wavelengths of light. So it gives the effect of a kind of rainbow color, but it's not just metallic. So that's what iridescence is. Okay. So don't worry, these terms will be sent to you. Even though somehow the star on my slide disappeared, but that's fine. So we'll move on to the next part. So the next part will be bird topography. So this looks like a lot of information, but don't worry. This one will actually be sent to you as well. You'll find out more about these terms as we talk about the birds later on. You can print this out as a reference for yourself if you need, but if not, you can actually Google similar diagrams on various websites. But this is just something that I like to use as an example. So no worries, this site will be will be sent to you later on. Okay, so with topography and with patterning and sheen and all that, we can talk about colors as well. So how do we describe the colors on a bird? We describe them by the parts of a bird. Okay, so we'll be comparing the pink-necked green pigeon over here with the crimson sunbird. As you can tell, they are very, very different colors, even though they are both birds and they both have some shared anatomy. Okay, so firstly, we'll start with the crown and forehead. The crown and forehead of the pink-necked green pigeon is actually a very dusty sort of grayish lavender. But on the crimson sunbird here, you can see that its crown and forehead is quite different looking, and it actually has a little metallic patch here that you can describe as either slaty gray or black. Okay, so as you can see, that's why we try to learn the parts of the bird, because then the descriptions of the color become a lot more easy. Okay, so next we move a bit lower. We talk about the nape, the back, and the throat. Okay, so this is the nape. The nape is the same as in humans. It's this part of your neck. And the back, of course, back is self-explanatory, this area here. And the throat, same, throat is over here. Okay, so the throat of the crimson sunbird is a bright red, and so much brighter than its nape and back. Additionally, on its throat, it has a thin black stripe that's also slightly metallic. So on the pink-necked green pigeon, it has a pink nape and neck. Its throat area is also pink, but if we move down slightly to its breast and belly, its breast actually has an orange patch here, and its belly is a pale green. So we go back to the crimson sunbird. So the breast and belly here, the breast is kind of reddish, but the belly is a slaty gray. Okay. So we also don't want to forget talking about the wings, because the wings are an important part of the bird. That's how birds fly. And sometimes you might only catch a glimpse of their wings. So the wings of the pink-necked green pigeon are pale green, a bit gray, and their flight feathers are actually black. So it looks like the wing has a black outline. There's also a yellow bar here, but in some specimens of the pink-necked green pigeon is not so obvious. So for the crimson sunbird, its wings are a lot simpler. They're basically almost black, and it has a little bit of red on the upper wing. Okay. So now we talk about the tail. So you can see the crimson sunbird's tail here is an overall navy blue, while the pink-necked green pigeon has undertail coverts that are like brown and yellow, while the upper tail coverts are bluish gray. Okay. So lastly, we're almost done with this slide. One more part. So this is the legs or the feet. So the legs of both birds look very, very different, and you can kind of describe them as on the pink-necked green pigeon, you can describe them as red and slightly thick. On the crimson sunbird, you can describe them as black or gray, and they're very slim and almost toothpick-like. So you can use descriptors such like to compare, such as like thick, toothpicky, very skinny. You can use all sorts of things to describe what you see when you see the bird outside. Okay. So what do we do if both birds have very, very similar coloration? So I'll talk about this in my next slide. So in this slide, we'll compare the scarlet-backed flowerpecker and the crimson sunbird. So as you can tell, these two birds have very, very similar color schemes. For somebody who might be a beginner bird watcher or have a very quick glimpse of these birds, you might not be able to catch like, hey, what are the parts of the bird that are like this color or that color. So no worries. Another trick you can use is to talk about proportions and features. So we'll start with their beaks. So on the scarlet-backed flowerpecker, the beak is a lot more triangular and a lot more compact, while on the crimson sunbird, its beak is elongated and skinny. And as I mentioned earlier on, sunbirds actually do feed on nectar, hence the beaks tend to be very skinny. And we'll talk about what the scarlet-backed flowerpecker eats later on in our presentation. Okay. So another thing is that the length of their body compared to the length of their tail. The crimson sunbird's body and tail are comparable in length. It's not a very obvious difference, and some specimens will actually have a much longer tail as well. But the scarlet-backed flowerpecker has a very, very short and stubby tail, and it looks almost round when you look at it overall. So you can talk about the proportions of the birds, and this will help you kind of differentiate them, especially when you're trying to seek help for an identification. Okay. We can also talk about, like I said, this bird is very round. You can talk about the general shape. So the general shape is another very important thing. Like if a bird looks round or chubby, you can use the descriptors round or chubby. Okay. So next we'll be talking about habitats. So this is a very, very simple broken down example of what habitats you might find certain birds in. So don't take it as like totally 100% scientific, but it's something that I often use to tell beginner bird watchers. Okay. So firstly, we have this neighborhood pond in a park with some HDB flats in the background. And what bird you might find here in an urban area with a water source is the white-breasted water hen. Okay, so white-breasted water hen is actually is actually one of our very common wading birds, and you can find it in fresh water. It doesn't really occur near the coastline. On the other hand, on the opposite spectrum of what you would see in an urban park is this is Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. And of course, it's a tropical rainforest. And what you would possibly see here is the olive-winged bulbul. So the olive-winged bulbul is a forest-dependent species. They don't like being out in the open. They like being in areas with a thick canopy and a lot of tree cover. So you usually find them only in forests. So these two birds are examples on either end of the spectrum, extreme ends of the spectrum, in fact. But you have some birds that would be in both locations. And this is our yellow-vented bulbul. This is our most common urban bulbul. And as you can see from these arrows, this indicates that this bird actually traverses between very urban areas and to the edges, not the thick, deep parts of the forest, but to the edges of rainforest as well. And knowing where the bird's habitat is, you can also narrow down your identification to basically, sorry, my throat, give me a second.
Sabrina, can you please speak slower?
Slower, okay, sorry. I will speak slower. If anything, you can also, this video will be shared so you can kind of slow me down. I'm sorry, I can't really see the chat at the moment because of the screen sharing. Okay, I will attempt to speak slower. Okay, thank you, Amy, for the heads up. Okay, so habitat. So certain birds will be only found in either habitat, but some will go between both. Okay, so next we'll talk about vocalization. So when we think about birds, first you think about flight. The second thing you think about is chirping or bird call. So birds do have a wide variety of vocalizations, and they can be broadly split into two categories, which is calls and songs. So songs are more complex, longer, associated with basically courtship and serenading. These are what a male bird would sing to a female bird, or it's rarely the other way around in the bird kingdom. So it's usually the male bird trying to impress the female bird. And calls are shorter and more abrupt. These are basically as a warning, or just so other birds know that I am here. So it'll be saying like, if I say like, hi Amy, so that is more like a call. But if I'm like trying to sing to my husband or something, then that would be basically a song, a courtship song, okay? So I think I'm gonna play this to all of you now. Please let me know if you can hear it. If you can't hear it, I'll try to open the chat and take a look. So this is one of the most well-known bird courtship songs that I think everybody knows. Okay, so that was basically the courtship call of the Asian koel. So you often hear this in the morning, but also throughout the day. And this is basically the male koel pictured here trying to attract a female. You won't hear female koels making this song. Only the males do it, okay? And then this is another call of the koel that is a little bit less familiar to a lot of people. And this is their contact or alarm call. So they use this to basically warn each other like there's something they're a bit unsure of over there, or just to communicate with another bird. Okay, so that was the contact call of the Asian koel. So female birds would make this noise towards males, and they'll actually use this call to communicate with each other as well. So these calls are just a sampling of what birds would basically do. The Asian koel is a good example for this vocalization, because they have very, very few calls. Some other birds have hundreds and hundreds of calls, but the Asian koel makes these two mostly. Okay. Okay, so I'll move to the next slide. So again, I have repeated some terms over here. This slide will be sent to you, and if any of the terms here that you're not familiar with that I've used, you can refer to it here. One term that will be mentioned later on is sexual dimorphism. So sexual dimorphism is basically when males and females of the same animal look very, very different. They will basically, humans are slightly sexual dimorphic, not as obvious as birds and other animals, but we do have some differences between the sexes, and like biological differences, or just, but sexual dimorphism usually means the visual differences, okay? So, and then here are some icons that are also used just to mark male and female birds, just so I don't have to keep typing out male and female, okay? So this is commonly used. Yeah, so sexual dimorphism, very obvious in some birds, not so obvious in other birds, but you'll be seeing more of this in a while. Okay, so I'll run through methodology. So unfortunately, we did mention that the practical is unable to be carried out, but the methodology section, I will expand it a little bit more so you don't miss out on certain things, okay? So methodology will begin. So the method that we're using is actually called the point count method. So we'll be counting the number and species of birds observed in 10 minutes while staying on a certain spot. So when I say stay on a certain spot, it doesn't mean you stand there and you spin around like 180 degrees. What you do is that you can walk a short distance back and forth around 2 meters radius. So just walk there, walk back, and stay on that roughly the same spot, okay? If you're confident with bird call ID, you can use each bird call as one bird. But if you're not, as some of you might be beginners, you can just use visuals to count and spot your birds. So what we do is that we spot as far as the eye can see, or approximately 800 meters radius. If you have your own binoculars, you can actually use it as wherever your binoculars can see until, but if you suspect that's in your next point, which we'll talk about shortly as well, then we'll kind of like, you can kind of leave that bird out of your count. Okay, so we also want to emphasize that we want a lower estimate to reduce instances of double counting, and we also use a lower estimate because we do not want like artificial inflation of the numbers of each of our birds that we are taking note of. We don't want it to be like, oh, every year we do this survey and the numbers actually seem to be increasing, but it's actually due to miscounting. We rather take a more conservative estimate than a very, very inflated one, okay? So here's a diagram of what your point count method will look like. So this is you, binoculars are optional. You're walking back and forth 2 meters radius, around 2 meters radius. So when you look for birds, look up in the sky, which is very intuitive to most people, but you also need to look on the ground and in tall grasses and all that where the birds are perched, okay? So when we talk about these birds, we also don't want to count dead birds. So do not count carcasses or dead birds. And also do not count, if you see birds' nests that you can't find the parent birds, don't count them as well, because we don't want to do a guess of what a bird might be inside. Unless you are very, very confident what you know, what like bird nest it is, don't count it bird's nest, okay? Another thing is don't count birds that you suspect might be somebody's pet or might be escapees. So this is, I'm using the example of a peacock. So actually in the southern region of Singapore, we have a lot of peacocks. And this is due to escapees from various tourist attractions, as well as pets. So they are native to kind of the South Asia region. So they do relatively well in Singapore. So sometimes some of your parks you might actually see peacocks. Especially if any of you are assigned to Labrador Park, you will see resident peacocks there. So please do not count birds like that. If you also ever are in the Singapore Botanic Gardens, if you see the swans, don't count the swans either, as they are considered like living collection for the Botanic Gardens, okay? So swans, peacocks, we do have native species of ducks, but don't count ducks if they are like the white duck with the yellow beak, as they are often kept as pets, okay? So no worries about this. We'll be talking about the 30 species of birds that you need to take note of later on in our presentation. But I just want to get the methodology out of the way first, because this is the most important part, as you won't be having a practical session. Okay. So now we're talking about the survey sites. So each site, survey site allocation has multiple points. So on the right side here, you can see a map. This is just a map of Thomson Nature Park. Thomson Nature Park is actually one of our more advanced sites. So we're just using as an example. I don't think most of you would have requested this site. So when you see your site, so for example, this is the entrance, you have to kind of walk in to your point first before you start your survey. So only start the 10-minute timing when you reach that point. Don't start it from the entrance, because then you might actually only be at the point for a minute or two. We also want to remind volunteers to walk at a decent pace due to the time limit. Don't run, don't like really drag your feet, but walk at a decent pace so you can complete the survey in time, okay? So when you're recording data, additional information will be on your data sheet will look something like this. So a copy of the data sheet will be sent to you, but this is what the header looks like. So you have date, you have name of surveyors. So your date, once again, is any time between 10th to 18th of April. You have to just choose one morning, okay? So you just choose one morning to go do your survey. If it ends up being very bad weather, you can take another morning and go back to the same place. If like the whole week is raining, or the whole week is really, really bad, or you have some issues that you can't complete a survey, don't worry, please drop an email to us and we'll try to cover the survey site on your behalf. So we also ask you if you have like visual aids, like a binoculars or camera. When I talk about camera, we don't mean handphone camera, we mean like a camera of a zoom lens, as this can actually help you ID as well. But we still want to emphasize that you don't need binoculars and you do not need a camera to spot the birds that we are featuring in our Garden Bird Watch survey, okay? So here on the form, we also have a confidence level of 1 to 5. I would say just be very honest here. We don't want our volunteers to be lying like, hey, I feel pressured to say I'm a 4 or 5. Nobody is going to pressure you into being like more confident in your ID. It's fine. Even for me, I would say I'm not even a 5. I'm like, on a bad day, I'm a 3. On a good day, I'm a 4, okay? So you can be very, very honest with how you feel about your survey results. You can always fill this in at the end, okay? You don't have to fill it in at the start. You can fill it in at the end after you spot some of your birds, okay? So another thing on the data sheet, we will be counting the birds based on each point rather than as a collective, okay? So let's say you have, this is YP1, so Yishun Park 1, you reach the point at 7:10 a.m. You spot these birds here, and your point count ends at 7:20, right? So then you take 8 minutes to walk to the next site, so it's 7:28 to 7:38, and then you spot these birds here. So as you can see, some of the birds might be repeated, but they're all treated as unique in each point. So if you see a yellow-vented bulbul at YP1, but you don't see at YP2, that's fine. If you see an olive-backed sunbird at YP1 and another one at YP2, count it as 2 separate individuals unless you're very, very sure the bird somehow followed you. Like some birds might be begging for food, like Java miners always beg for food. If you think it's the same bird following you, you can exclude it from your account. But if you think it's a separate bird and your points are quite far away from each other, our team has already kind of like made the points far enough that most birds will not be double counted. But if you suspect it's the same bird, it's up to your discretion. Another thing I want to emphasize is that when you're using the count method, be consistent. Either use 2 + 3 + 1, or you can use the 5-strike method. Don't switch back and forth between the two, because, for example, if you write 11 here and then you switch to this, do you count it as 11 or do you count it as 2? So be consistent in how you record your data. It will be very helpful for you later on. And if you want to submit your data as a scanned copy, it will also be very helpful for us, okay? So a data sheet will be sent to you, and other instructions also will be sent to you with your site allocation nearer the date. So we are still a little bit some time away from 10th April. So no worries, most of this information will actually reach you by the by end of March. So that's actually next week. You'll be expecting a few emails from us in the following days. Yeah, so do look out for them. On the day of your survey, I want to emphasize that you need to locate your park and points between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. Try to get as close to the point as possible. In each map, you'll actually be given GPS coordinates. So if you if you have your phone not with you, you can actually pre-load your GPS coordinates and save it in Google Maps as a set of points. And then that will help you a lot if you want to navigate on the day itself. If not, the map should be clear enough that you'll be able to find the points on the day itself with very little effort, okay? So we want you to have a physical data sheet, as we realize that looking at a phone, you can miss a lot of birds during your survey. And you are able to actually have a faster reaction time if you're just holding a pencil and just writing down rather than typing on your phone. Okay, if you're very, very confident in using this on your phone, then please go ahead. But from most of our past participants' feedback, a physical data sheet is what was easiest for them. Okay, a phone link will also be sent out with your site allocation. So this would be the easiest method to submit your data. But if you would prefer to scan it to us at cin@nparks.gov.sg, that is fine as well. But please be very clear in your handwriting if you want to do this method, although the form link will be the preferred method. Okay, if you want to share your photos on social media, here is some info. NParks bars, #NParks Garden Bird Watch. Some things to take note of is double counting and do not count swiftlets. So we haven't talked about bird ID, but there's just one bird that we're not going to be counting, which is the swiftlet. So swiftlets actually are insectivorous birds that fly very, very high up. A lot of them are quite difficult to ID apart, especially for beginners. If you're very, very sure of the ID of the swiftlet, you can actually submit it to us as additional info in your online submission. But if you are not sure, it's fine. We will not be counting this species, this type of bird in our surveys, okay? So now I'll kind of give everybody a 3-minute break. We'll be actually going on to the next section after this. So if everybody can return at 7:45 exactly, really appreciate it. Do type out your questions in the chat in the meantime, and we'll collate the FAQ later on, okay? So 3-minute break, type out your questions. Like the more questions you have, the better. So I'll see you in 3 minutes. Okay, so welcome back everybody. It's 7:46, so we'll now begin. So I hope we had a good break, drink water, use the restroom, whatever. So now we'll be talking about the 30 bird species that you have to identify. So a lot of people tell me that 30 birds is a lot. It's not a lot when you think that we have 400 over species of birds in Singapore. I think the current count is around either 408 or 412. I'm not 100% sure, as it does change quite fast. So 30 birds is barely 10% of that. Yeah, so just a very broad overview of some of the birds we'll be talking about. So if you've joined us before for any of our Garden Bird Watch surveys, sometimes you might have learned 4 additional migratory birds. So those are not being shared in the April session because most of them have already flown back to their like native countries. Okay. So the first bird we'll be talking about is actually the Javan myna. I'm very sure all of you have seen and interacted with this bird before, be it like just staring at you as you're standing on the road, or even like at the hawker center trying to snatch food from your plate. So they are very, very adaptable birds, and as their name suggests, actually as their name suggests, their native range is actually Java. So they're actually found around Java, Bali, some islands in Indonesia. And the irony of this being a very common bird in Singapore is that they're actually listed as vulnerable on the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which IUCN for short, red list. So this bird is very rare in its native range because it's been over collected and hunted for the pet trade. And why it's hunted for the pet trade is because it actually can mimic and be trained to learn calls, and hence in its native range where wildlife laws are a bit weaker, it's been hunted to near extinction. Okay, so its population globally is actually declining, but its population in Singapore is actually very stable, and it's quite interesting because when I was quite a bit younger, still in school, which was a long time ago, I actually saw a very experienced birders have these very big telephoto lenses. So he was like prone on the floor. He was a tourist, so he was like in singlet and pants, and like this was in the middle of like, I think it was like Orchard Road, and he was with this huge lens taking photo of this Javan myna right in front of him. And then everybody around him was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "Oh, these are actually very rare." So I was just like, "Oh, that's quite interesting," because back then I didn't know that these were a globally vulnerable species, because in their native range they are so rare. So Javan mynas are a bird that not all of us might really like, but they are actually quite interesting to be able to see in Singapore. Okay, so Javan mynas basically are one of the 2 myna species you'll be learning today, and they actually are quite interesting as that when they fly, you actually have these little white patches that can be seen on the underside of their wings, and this is one identifying feature you can identify them by. They are usually more easy to spot when they're on the ground because they are not very scared of humans, and they're usually in small groups. Okay. So next one is the common myna. So the common myna is the flip side of the Javan myna. So the common myna is actually our native species of myna, one of them at least. So its name is common because back when people were naming birds, usually brown birds tend to name common as they're very drab and very, in that sense, uninteresting, hence common. So this bird is actually listed as least concern on the IUCN red list, but in Singapore, it's considered declining in population because of competition from the Javan myna. So you have a very interesting kind of balance here, because these 2 birds actually have the same, what we call an ecological niche. They eat the same things, they do the same things, they're found in the same place, just that the Javan myna is a little bit better at doing this in Singapore's context. We kind of suspect because the common myna is usually found in slightly smaller groups and it isn't able to fight for food as much as the Javan myna. So a lot of beginners can't tell the common myna and Javan myna apart, so we'll be looking at them side by side. So let's just play this game of spot the difference. So firstly, the common myna, as you can tell, is overall brown, while the Javan myna is overall a blackish gray. So this is the first obvious difference, because in sunlight, the brown is very, very obviously kind of dark brown, while the Javan myna is what you see is what you get. It's a blackish gray bird. Okay. The next thing is the common myna has this patch of yellow around its eyes. So this is the bare skin that's found around its eyes that's absent in the Javan myna. So no Javan mynas would have this feature. Okay, only the common myna has it. So next is the color of the irises. So irises are basically a part, like most Asians have brown or very dark green irises. So the Javan, so likewise, so does the common myna. Is very brown, sometimes reddish iris, but the Javan myna's iris is actually a very pale yellow to almost white. So this is not its eye white, it's actually its irises. Okay. Oops. So sorry. So back here. So similarly, they do have a lot of similarities, but when you see them from far, right, the most obvious difference is actually the color. Okay, so look for the brown and then look for the iris. That's what I would suggest to be able to tell these two apart. So next we have the Asian glossy starling. So Asian glossy starlings one of another bird that you might see in quite big groups. So they have a very sleek build and they're around 19 to 22 cm. So I just wanted to clarify, we're talking about the length from beak to tail. We're not talking about wingspan, because wingspan is a bit difficult to estimate when you see a bird, especially when it's perched. So we'll be talking about total length of the bird. Okay, so they have a very sleek build and the adults are glossy green with black plumage, with black beak and legs. So overall, when you see them not in sunlight, they'll be totally black with a very bright red iris. So the juveniles actually look quite different. So the juveniles have gray-brown upper parts and striated bellies. So this is actually the example we used when we talked about striation earlier on. And the juveniles and adults look very, very different. The good thing is that, as I mentioned, these birds like being in groups. You will rarely see the juveniles alone. They're usually begging for food from the parents or one of the other members of the flock. And when they're in a big flock, they tend to be very, very noisy. And I'll be sharing the sounds with you now. Okay, so that was basically a flock of Asian glossy starlings. They have a multitude of different calls and they'll basically all talk to each other at the same time. So you'll kind of hear this, especially in the mornings and in the evenings when they're roosting, although you can't really see them very well in the evening because it gets a bit dark. But these birds are quite social and hence you rarely see them alone, okay? Next is the swinhoe's white-eye. So this was previously called the oriental white-eye, but basically genetic work and studies have shown that this is actually the swinhoe's white-eye instead. So in the ID sheet that you received, it has not been corrected as swinhoe's white-eye, it's still oriental white-eye. So my apologies about that. But this bird is basically quite interesting in the fact that it's been a bit of a topic of how do I phrase this? Basically, because of the illegal trade in pet birds, certain populations of white eyes have basically hybridized or basically gone extinct. So there have been studies on this bird to kind of figure out which species we still have in Singapore. So it's originally thought to be the oriental white eye, but it's actually the swinhoe's white eye. Okay, so they're relatively small birds, and they're actually leaf gleaners. So as you can see here, this pair is actually sharing a little spider or insect right here. So these birds' main diet is actually insects and spiders, basically things with arthropods. Okay, so you'll see them in the canopy and quite high up because they like to forage and glean among the leaves. They are also like quite uniform in color except for the belly here, which is a pale gray. Everything else is just like yellow green. Their vent, their throat, their upper side is entirely yellow green. Okay, so they why I mentioned that they were so they're kind of like traded in the pet trade and quite illegally is because they have quite a pleasant call. Okay, so this is the call of the swinhoe's white-eye. You actually sadly still see them quite oftenly traded in the cage bird trade. You'll see people hanging them outside their houses in small cages and all that. And it's still quite sad to see, but yeah, so hopefully you'll get to see them in the wild as well. So next, another small bird is the Eurasian tree sparrow. So Eurasian tree sparrows are mostly, though they are called tree sparrows, you mostly see them on low foliage and the ground. They're overall very chocolate brown. They have black cheeks, so both male and female birds will have the black cheeks. But sometimes when you read children's books about other sparrows, only the males have it, and that's because they're talking about different species. So this is something that some of my volunteers actually bring up, and our native Eurasian tree sparrows have black cheeks on both sexes. Okay. So here you can see the mottling on the back, black and a bit of brown, and a bit of white. On the underside, they're actually just a very like pale gray, okay, almost white. So if you see them from this direction, this is what they look like. If you see them from the top, this is what they look like. Okay, another very similar bird to the Eurasian tree sparrow is the scaly-breasted munia. So the differences are that the scaly-breasted munia is a lot more, its beak is a lot more robust. So beak and bill are interchangeable, so I'll be using both terms. Its beak is very robust and almost the width of its head. And remember we talked about scaling, so this is a bird that I use as the example for scaling because they are scaly, hence they're called scaly-breasted munias. A lot of birds are called named very, very descriptive names, not like, for example, my name is Sabrina, right? It's not very descriptive, but birds are named after what they look like. Okay, so the scaly-breasted munia, you often find it near water bodies and they like tall grasses like lalang and all that. So that's because they use their big, thick bill to crack open the seeds and nuts from these grasses. They're actually quite common in certain areas like Bishan Ang Mo Kio Park and Gardens by the Bay. You actually see them at Gardens by the Bay as well, near water where there are these type of like tall grasses. Okay. So next is the yellow-vented bulbul. So why it's called the yellow-vented bulbul? This is its vent, and the vent is yellow. So the yellow is not because of staining or like excrement. It's actually naturally the bird has a yellow vent. So some of my younger volunteers would say, the bird has a yellow butt. So yeah, okay, you can think of it as the butt of the bird. Yeah, so they are relatively kind of say small, medium bird. They are 20 cm and they have they wear spectacles. So I like to call this spectacles because it looks like the bird is wearing those old school like motorcycle goggles that look like that. And they have a white face, grayish underside. But honestly, their most defining feature is their yellow vent. Overall, the bird is not a very colorful bird, but it is very common in our parks and gardens. Okay, so yellow-vented bulbul. Another thing to note is that it's mostly frugivorous. Frugivorous means they eat fruit. So you can see here it has a berry in its mouth. Okay, so next bird will be our rock dove. So I think all of you are also very familiar with this bird. Why we want to talk about it is because it's considered, it is an introduced species, so they're very, very successful and very adaptable because in their native habitat, which is Europe, they kind of nest and roost on cliff faces. So a cliff face is basically a hard wall, right? So that's why they're such adaptable birds in a urban setting, because they are basically like, oh, suddenly there's a lot of walls for them to nest on. So you see them like perching and just falling asleep on the side of buildings, and they are very comfortable just being on the ground as well. We'll talk about two different colorations. One is the wild type coloration, which is what we see here. It's basically overall gray with some black stripes and wing barring, with a very iridescent chest. The males during breeding season, so around now, the coloration, the sheen becomes very, very bright and very iridescent because the feathers are like new feathers that just grew in. Yeah, so this is the wild type coloration, and we're talking about the feral coloration as well. What feral means is that because these fancy varieties were basically likely released pets in the earlier days of Singapore's history. A lot of people, when they colonized Singapore, they'll bring along their pets, and pigeon racing and all that was something that they might have done and introduced these more colorful breeds of more colorful forms of pigeon into our feral populations. Okay, so they can be almost any color. Yep, but this is the wild coloration. Why I'm showing you this is because I want to be able to let you guys, the volunteers, know that not all brown pigeons might be the rock dove. They might be something else, but there is this color morph for the rock dove or rock pigeon. Okay, so now we'll be talking about one of our native pigeons. So this is a pigeon or dove, sorry, this is a kind of interchangeable term. Very loosely defined that doves are slightly smaller and pigeons are slightly bigger, but some doves are very big and some pigeons are very small, so it's just a very loose term. So the spotted dove is a bird that's around 30 cm in length, and if you think of 30 cm, that's around the size of a long ruler or the length of a A4 sheet of paper. Okay, so they have a very stout and bulky build, and why they're called a spotted dove is because of this black cape with white spots on the back of their neck. So spotted dove, this is why they're named the spotted dove. Okay, so they're overall very kind of buff beach, which is like pinkish, a bit brown, and they have red feet. Okay. Another native dove we have is the zebra dove. So the zebra dove is slightly smaller at 21 cm, and how we differentiate this from the spotted dove is that, like a zebra, it has barring all through its body. Okay. Another interesting thing is that it has a blue eye ring, which is actually a patch of blue skin. So the skin is a bluish tone around its eye. That is obvious if you look at the bird under like sunlight and daylight conditions. Okay. So we'll do a side by side for these two birds because a lot of my beginner volunteers get very confused by them. So we'll do spot the differences again. So the first difference on the zebra dove, you have the blue eye ring. On the spotted dove, it's absent, but they do have this little black teardrop here. So this is very, very obviously blue. Okay. Next is the spotted dove's namesake, which is its little mantle or capelet on the back of its neck. Over here, black with white spots, which is absent in the zebra dove. Another thing is that the sizes are very, very different because these two birds are often found in very similar habitats. If you get a chance to see them next to each other, the differences become very, very obvious. But if you cannot, then just remember, if you think it's either one of these and it's quite large, it's probably the spotted dove and not the zebra dove, because the zebra dove is relatively tiny. Okay, so yeah, so these are the differences, and obviously the zebra dove is stripy, while the spotted dove is not. Another pigeon that we have native to Singapore is the pink-necked green pigeon. So you've seen this earlier on when I was talking about coloration, and these birds are a bit different from the other doves and pigeons that we've covered because they like being in trees. So the spotted dove and zebra dove like being lower vegetation on the ground. You still see them in trees, but the pink-necked green pigeon, you will rarely see it on the ground. I've seen these on the ground maybe once in my entire bird watching life, and it was because it was a very dry spell maybe 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago, and the only water source was basically radiator fluid from the cars. So because of that, they were actually like going onto the road and drinking the condensed radiator fluid from the cars, and it was quite a sight to be able to see them on the road. But it's actually not a good thing because their natural habitat is up in the treetops. Why this is so is because they actually feed on fruit. So where the fruit is where this bird is. Okay, so the males, as mentioned, have a pink neck and orange breast patch over here, lavender gray head, quite colorful overall, while the females are just green. They're basically very, very green. And yeah, so there's not much to talk about the female coloration because, as I mentioned, this bird is actually sexually dimorphic, and most sexually dimorphic birds, the male is a lot more colorful. Okay, so you'll see this kind of repeated throughout some of the other bird species that we'll be talking about. Okay, so for the pink-necked green pigeon, very chunky, very round, quite cute. They are quite lovable birds to watch. If you ever see them, they're usually in pairs or small groups. Okay, so after this, we'll be talking about house crow. So house crow is interesting because they are our most common urban crow as well, and they were actually introduced from Indochina and South Asia. So this is maybe not as far as where the rock pigeon came from, but the house crow likely hitchhiked on ships and containers when things such as biosecurity and quarantine were not commonly in place. So they are quite big birds, around 41 cm. They have black plumage with a lighter gray area extending from the nape. Like basically this area, they look like they're wearing a gray scarf or hood basically. And they feed on dead things. So they'll kind of eat your trash, they'll eat dead animals. So they're part of, they're kind of like fulfill the scavenger role in the ecosystem. Because without scavengers, you would see like small dead animals a lot more than you do now. Okay, so house crow. Then other crow we'll be talking about is the large-billed crow. So this is our native species of crow, and it's quite different looking in my opinion. It's entirely black. It does not have the gray hood, and it's a forest species in Singapore because of competition from the house crow. So in other countries, including places like Japan or Taiwan, you actually possibly even see this scavenging your garbage because they are more adapted there. I've actually, when I was in Tokyo a few years back, I stayed in an apartment complex, and then we had to take out our own trash, right? So in the morning, you would see a line of these crows, and they are quite massive. They're like 54 cm, just lining up to try to snatch the trash from your hand because they do not have house crows as large a population as we do have. So it's interesting to see the dynamics when you go travel. Of course, travel is not something we can currently do. I'll do a side-by-side of these two as well. Comparison between house crow and the large-billed crow. First thing, the domed head. Large-billed crow has a very domed head, while the house crow's head is relatively flat. The beak size, the large-billed crow's beak is actually longer than its domed head, while the house crow's beak is not that long. Okay. Oops. Yeah. So another thing is that the calls, you'll hear crow calls throughout the day. They do make quite a bit of noise. So this is what the house crow sounds like. So it's a higher pitch, like R sounding sound, R sort of sound. While the sorry, I can't hide my controls. While the large-billed crow sounds like this. Okay, so the large-billed crow basically sounds more like what you imagine a crow sounds like when you watch those like scary movies and stuff. It has a very low like sort of sound, and you'll hear it a lot less commonly than you would the house crow. Okay, so I'm just sharing the bird calls with you to give you a bit of examples, but you don't have to remember them. Visually, these birds are different enough. Okay, so now we'll talk about Singapore's alarm clock. As all we know, this is the Asian koel, very noisy. We've talked about use this bird as the example for bird call earlier on. Another interesting fact is that Asian koels didn't used to be so common because they are brood parasites. Okay, what a brood parasite is that it's a bird that doesn't look after its own young. It actually finds another bird's nest, kicks the eggs out, and lays its own eggs inside. So that's the breeding habit of the Asian koel. Okay, and its hosts in Singapore are both the house crows and the large-billed crows. So before the introduction of the house crows, large-billed crows weren't actually that common, and hence this bird wasn't that common. But because now we have so many house crows, the Asian koel is also very common because it has more of its host to parasitize upon. So as you can see, these birds are quite different looking. The male is a glossy black, while the female is this overall very brown with barring, alternating barring and spots all throughout its body. Okay, another interesting fact about Asian koel is that it's a frugivore, mainly a frugivore. They really like palm seeds, so you'll see them on MacArthur palms and other ornamental palms when they're fruiting. If you can spot this bird, count yourself very, very lucky. Sorry, usually you only hear it and you don't see it. So if you can see one, it's quite a lucky thing. Okay, so male, female. Another thing to know about the Asian koel is that its tail is actually quite long. So this is how you kind of differentiate it from the crows, which have very, very kind of short tails. Okay. So another bird, our next bird is the black-naped oriole. So black-naped orioles are very, very yellow, very bright yellow, with like a black eye stripe. So they look like a burglar. They look like those cartoon burglars you see on like, you know, I don't know whether McDonald's still has a hamburger, but it looks like that. Okay, so they have a very obvious pink beak and yellow plumage. And this is an adult bird. I'll show you the juvenile bird because the juveniles look very different. So the good thing is that the juveniles and adults are usually always together. So if you see something that looks like this, it's also a black-naped oriole, just its juvenile plumage. So the juveniles lack the, oops, I'm so sorry about that. The juveniles lack the pink beak. Instead, they have a kind of black or gray beak instead. And as they mature, the beak actually becomes more pink. Okay, so you've already seen the next slide. I'm sorry about that. So this is the common Iora. So why we put this next to the black-naped oriole is that this is a smaller bird that's also very, very yellow. And it's like quite difficult to spot, but you will have a higher chance of spotting this in April, which is the current survey period, because these birds will be more flashy and showy when they are in breeding season, which is now. Okay, so here you have the male and the female. So the male without in normal season is not as black and not as flashy as the breeding season male. As you can tell, it has, this one as an example has bulked up quite a bit, and its feathers are a bit more vibrant looking, as well as the fact that during breeding season, you'll see the black mask extend more downwards as they shed out their new feathers. The black actually becomes more obvious, and you'll see them a lot more in April because this is when they're actively trying to look for a mate. You'll hear the calls. You can basically, I can't share the call with you due to some restrictions, as they are still trapped for the catbird trait, but I'll give you a resource that you can try to listen for the calls later on, okay? They both have white wing bars, which is absent in the black-naped oriole as a comparison. So here you go. I didn't do a side-by-side for this because these birds actually look very different when you spot them in the wild. Okay. Another thing is that orioles tend to be very high up, but ioras, they like smaller shrubs and more twiggy vegetation, so you might be able to find them deeper in the undergrowth as well. Okay. So next we talk about the scarlet-backed flower pecker. So as the name suggests, flower pecker. So how it finds food is it actually destroys fruits and flowers. So it'll peck at the flower or the fruit until the fruit basically like goes like mushy like this, and then it'll eat the insects. So in a way, they're a little bit violent, even though they're like fruit eating birds. They're quite rough with their food. It's quite interesting to watch. So they are a small bird, around 9 cm, and the males and females, again, sexually dimorphic, they look quite different. So males are quite colorful, with a blackish charcoal gray here and a bit of black on their wings. And they're red, basically red extends from the crown all the way to the upper tail coverts, which is the rump area. So it's like your lower back, that's the equivalent in a bird. Okay. For the females, they only have the red rump and upper tail coverts, and they are overall grayish olive. Some people might call it brown. It depends of the lighting, but it's an overall very drab color for the females. And once again, it's because the males are the ones trying to impress the females, and the females have the mate choice selection. So yeah, the males have to kind of wow the ladies a bit. Okay. Olive-backed sunbird. So another very small, very colorful bird. This is our most common urban sunbird. So olive-backed sunbird, another very literally named bird, its back is entirely olive, while the males have this very iridescent blue forehead, throat, upper breast. The females look like this. Okay, so the females are quite plain looking, and I won't be talking about the description now because we'll talk about the next sunbird that we are learning about, which is the brown-throated sunbird. So the males, once again, very, very colorful. They have a bit of a thicker bill than the olive-backed sunbird, and they have a lot of iridescence, like it's just metallic and iridescent all over the head area. Okay, and the females look very drab, and some of you might realize that they look very similar to the olive-backed sunbird females. So we'll do a side-by-side. This is a bit more difficult of a spot the difference activity, because even for me, sometimes I need to look at these birds a bit longer than I would take to ID other birds. Okay, so first thing, we'll talk about the eyes. Okay, so we're talking about the area around the eyes right now. If you can see this arrow, it's actually pointing to an eyebrow or supercilium stripe that's pale, slightly paler yellow. It's not obvious in all specimens, but only the olive-backed sunbird has this, while the brown-throated sunbird has a slightly pale ring around its eyes. Okay. Another thing is that the eye color. Olive-backed sunbird, the eyes are dark brown or very, very dark red, but in bright light, the brown-throated sunbird, the eyes will be quite a bright red. Okay, so you can see the redness from quite far. Another thing is that the brown-throated sunbird is 14 cm, while the olive-backed sunbird is around 10 cm maximum. It'll be basically 10 cm or smaller, while the brown-throated sunbird is around 14. Also, overall, the build of the olive-backed sunbird is very much more slight, more compact, while the brown-throated sunbird has a little bit more of a robust build. Okay, another last thing I want to talk about is the yellow on their breast. The olive-backed sunbird's yellow is a more warm, more almost orangey yellow, while the brown-throated sunbird, the female's yellow, is a little bit lighter and a little bit more green hued. So that's something that you might be able to tell them apart by. Okay, so once again, don't fret, this is recorded, and I apologize for speaking a bit fast just now, but I'm just a bit scared that we are running out of time. So next we'll talk about the collared kingfisher. So this is one of those birds that people always call by the wrong name. So I'm just gonna emphasize that this is the collared kingfisher and not the white collared kingfisher, because if you put white collared kingfisher, we are not sure which bird you're talking about, because some of the next bird that we're talking about has a very similar name. So this is the collared kingfisher. It has a white neck collar is also white. It has a blue crown and upper parts, and its bill is very large because kingfisher, they eat fish as well as reptiles and other small mammals as well. So their diet is quite mixed, but they are mainly piscivores, which is fish eating. Okay, so here's the call of the collared kingfisher. I'm going to play it again. Yeah, so you might hear this call in the afternoons and evenings. This bird likes to basically perch on branches and start making its call because it's kind of like to signal that this is my territory. You see them a lot around water bodies, canals. They like to perch on railings and actually street lamps. So they perch a lot on these two things because it's an artificial area that they find helps them hunt because they have a clearer view of the water from something like a street lamp rather than something like a tree. So they're quite adaptable. They are very common in urban areas as well. And they're around 25 cm, which is quite small for kingfisher. So the next one is white-throated kingfisher. And this is why I say collared kingfisher, white-throated kingfisher. Don't mix up these two names because sometimes if you're doing sending in your ID sheet, you'll confuse us, you'll confuse yourself. Everybody will be confused together, okay? So white-throated kingfisher, very different looking bird, overall chestnut brown, with some bright turquoise on its wings. Its beak or bill is a very nice bright red, and it's a very, in my opinion, this is a very, very beautiful bird. Its habitats and stuff, it tends to prefer a little bit more forest cover than the collared kingfisher. So collared kingfisher is a little bit more comfortable in urban settings. White-throated kingfisher, you can find it in urban settings, but it prefers a little bit more tree cover. So you'll probably find this in places like if you by any chance are in Pasir Ris Park, you'll see it in Pasir Ris Park because there's quite a lot of mature trees. Well, for example, the collared kingfisher, you see it like in also in Marina Bay, like a very, very urban area. Okay. So now we talk about white-breasted water hen. So I vaguely touched on this bird earlier on when we were talking about habitats. So white-breasted water hen is one of our, it's a freshwater kind of water-age bird. So they don't really swim, they just wade around in the water with their very long legs. They have yellow feet and yellow beak with this red spot. So the red spot is quite obvious in adults. In juveniles, it's not as obvious. And they have slaty charcoal upper parts with like their backside is brown. So they have a very interesting gait because their feet are actually very big. And they'll kind of like walk quite ambly and slow. They don't really fly very well. So they usually just run and walk. If you see them flying, it's quite hilarious because the legs basically, most birds tuck their legs up. When these fly, they just dangle their legs down. So it's just like loosely dangling underneath them. So it's quite hilarious to see them fly. Okay, so they are quite stocky birds as well, around 33 cm. Some of them might look a little bit bigger if they have slightly more to eat in the season. Okay. So now we'll talk about a common flameback. So the common flameback is actually a type of woodpecker, and they are, well, common flameback because they have these gorgeous, gorgeous feathers that are almost, when you see them in sunlight, they are almost golden. They're not shiny or metallic at all. It's just that the color is so saturated and so bright. Okay, males and females look very similar. The only difference is that the male has a red crest, while the female has a black crest. Okay, so this is the female, this is the male. They are very much they like big trees. You usually see them around mature areas with slightly older trees, slightly more trees, because they'll actually drill into wood to find beetle grubs and all that, as well as to excavate their nest. So that's why they're called woodpeckers. I mentioned this, they peck into wood. Okay, so next we have the Sunda pygmy woodpecker. It's a small woodpecker, very, very small. When I saw this in real life, it's shockingly small because you think woodpeckers are quite big, but this one, if I imagine it, it could fit nicely into the palm of my hand. So they're overall brown with a brown mask and some cream-colored underparts. They have very, very light striation, but you probably won't be able to see this unless the bird is quite close to you. Okay. So I'm going to show you the calls because this is another bird call that people find quite familiar. It's just that you might not have heard it before. Okay, so this is the flameback. So the flameback's call is, so it's just very like staccato, like da, 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 very, very fast and very almost mechanical. But for the Sunda pygmy, this is what the call sounds like. So the call sounds more like almost like if you have a child or a puppy or something, you know, the squeaky toy that they play with, or rubber ducky, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like a squeaky toy. So I'm going to play the call again. Yeah, so Sunda pygmy woodpecker and common plainback, two of the main woodpeckers that you'll see during your surveys. We do have other species, but these are the two most common. Okay. Now we're talking about the common tailor bird. So the common tailor bird is extremely slight in build, 12 cm. You might think 12 cm is quite big, but these birds tend to actually like deflate themselves. So they look very, very tiny and very skinny. You see when they're calling, they're actually very loud when they're calling. Proportionate to their size, their call is extremely loud. I'm not sharing an example of the call because they have a plethora of calls. But when this bird is calling, you'll see this very well-defined dark patch appear on their throat. And yeah, so common tailor bird, why they're called a tailor bird is because they actually collect spider webs and other like sticky material to sew their nests together. So that's why they're called tailor birds. Another interesting fact about them is that they act very much like rodents. So when you see them, you might actually think it's a mouse or something, because the way they like kind of scuttle around in they don't step on the floor, but they'll be scuttling around on the low branches and foliage. So they act a lot like rodents in that aspect. Okay, next we have the oriental magpie robin. If you are early enough in our chat, you might have seen my profile photo. So this is actually my favorite bird of all time. I find them totally adorable and probably a bit biased towards them. So the oriental magpie robin is a songbird. So they have a very beautiful song. So the recording actually is protected, that we basically the bird watching community at large believes that the call should not be shared because it can fall into the wrong hands of the wrong people who use the call to attract the birds and trap them. So oriental magpie robin actually its population numbers are going up, which is a good sign, likely because of more suitable habitat. So they like forested areas, but also like places with open spaces. So naturalized parks, more nature park areas, they do like basically they like having an option of being in the forest or being slightly more open. And how you identify this bird is that it looks like it's wearing a little tuxedo. Its belly area is cut halfway, and it's white at the bottom and black on the top. The males and females look quite similar. So this is the female and this is the male. But the male has a more glossy black sort of feathering. Although that being said, in dim light, they look very similar. Okay. My favorite bird. I really like these. Okay, so female, male. Oh, sorry, forgot to mention that the juveniles will also look quite similar to the females. Birds actually shed their feathers when they transition from juveniles to adults, and this process can leave the males looking quite similar to females for a little bit of time in their lifespan. Okay, so now we'll talk about the red jungle fowl. So red jungle fowl is not really a chicken in what we would think when we think about a chicken, because these are thought to be the ancestors to all the chickens that you see on your plate if you eat chicken, that is. They are actually native to this region, and they are quite large, so they're around 70 cm, although they can look bigger than that if they are puffed up or if their tail feathers are very long. The females are overall brown with a bit of scaling, so the scaling is only obvious in brighter light, especially on their throat area. Okay, the males are actually very, very colorful, with very prominent. So you know these skin flaps that chickens have, we call those facial wattles. So wattles refers to the loose skin on the face of the bird. Okay, so we'll be teaching you how to differentiate red jungle fowl from domestic chicken. Okay, so jungle fowl or chicken. So I want to clarify that we want you to record the chickens, but not, sorry, we want you to record the jungle fowl and not the chickens or hybrids. So because these are ancestral to most chickens, they actually can hybridize with populations of domestic chickens. So we're going to be comparing the roosters, because the roosters are easier to compare than the females, because the females don't have very much identifying features. So first thing is that a wild actual red jungle fowl should not have any white on its body except for a tuft of feathers at the base of its tail. Okay, so if you see this photo here, this rooster is blonde white. It is a domestic or feral rooster and not a jungle fowl. Likewise, look at this one here. So it looks very similar overall, except that its wings have a white patch here. So it is not a jungle fowl. Okay, The next thing we want to talk about is the ear drum. So this white thing is the ear drum, or it's basically not ear drum. It's what we call like a ear flap. It basically is just below where the the bird's actual ear is. So the ear is kind of hidden. So in a jungle fowl, it's very clean white. You don't see like little bits of pink or little bits of yellow or red on it, compared to these two where the wattles are like very little white or almost not white at all. So the jungle fowl has this very clear, very white ear wattle drum. Okay. And the next thing, this is the one that if you can see, it's a very telling feature, but sometimes you can't see this because they are like in deep foliage or something. Jungle fowls always have gray and black feet, while domestic roosters and hybrids have yellow or pink feet. Okay, so if you see that it has yellow feet, it is a hybrid, don't count it, or it might even be somebody's escapee pet. So hopefully this clarifies the differences for you. Yeah, so jungle fowls do not have white, but they have very white wattle, eardrum wattle, and domestic roosters and hybrids have yellow feet. Okay, so next we'll be talking about bee eaters. So bee eaters are kind of we suspect they're supposed to be migratory, but you can actually see them in some places almost throughout the whole year. So in April, you actually see more of them. So it's a good thing for you because these birds are quite gorgeous and quite fun to observe. So they like perching on high places because as their name suggests, they eat bees as well as other flying insects. So they will snatch these insects mid-flight and keep returning to the same perch over and over again. So as you can see, even though these two are different birds, this is actually photographed on the exact same branch. So they will keep reusing the same branch over and over again. So we have the blue-throated bee eater and the blue-tailed bee eater. So how I like to tell our volunteers to remember these is that the blue-throated bee eater has a blue throat. That's all you have to remember for these two species to be able to tell them apart. So the blue-throated bee eater has an obviously blue throat, and that's a very easy feature to spot because if you're looking at the bird from underneath as they're flying around you, you'll be able to see the blue throat quite easily. Okay. They're not particularly large birds, around 23, 24 cm, and they are basically yeah, very similar. Their habits and everything is like 90% the same. The only difference is that how they look. So you often see them in the same areas when if you even see them at all, you see both species. Okay. So last bird. So we're almost done. Besides some final reminders, this is the last bird we'll be talking about. So this is the Oriental Pied Hornbill. It's a very large bird. 69 cm is what we have them recorded as length on paper, but I think that actually they can grow a little bit larger than that. They are mainly frugivorous, which means they eat fruit, but they will actually attack smaller animals, other birds' nests as a source of protein, especially if it's a nesting male and female, and the male is trying to feed the female with something high in protein so she can nurse the young. Not nurse the young, but like look after the young or develop eggs. Okay. So they actually went extinct in the 1800s, probably due to hunting as a trophy specimen. And they kind of returned to Singapore due to a mix of naturalization of our urban spaces as well as reintroduction efforts in the Singapore Hornbill Project, which has various stakeholders involved in it, including NParks. So due to the reintroduction efforts in the 2000s, it's the earlier part of the 2000s, like before 2010, the populations have been growing quite steadily. You'll see them quite often now, I think. Like if you follow social media and all that, they actually appear in the news quite a lot nowadays. So the reintroduction efforts have been very much successful. You can read more about how these were reintroduced online. It's called the Singapore Hornbill Project, and you can kind of read more about that. Okay, so yeah, we're done with our 30 birds, but hopefully you guys can stay with me a little while more because we have some other admin matters to finish off. So first thing is safety and hazards. So safe distancing guidelines. As I believe a lot of the guidelines now are starting to change and shift, but we still have limitations, and this is just one of the reasons why we couldn't have the practical session. Once again, very sorry about that. Please check for updates before heading for your surveys, and please remember to wear your mask. If you find it very difficult to wear your mask while walking from point to point, and you're like huffing and panting, you are allowed to take out your mask if you're exercising, but if you're on the spot looking at birds looking for birds, please wear your mask, okay? Weather. So birds are active mostly in the morning and mostly when it's good weather. So if it's sunny or cloudy, you may proceed with your survey. If it's a bit drizzly, you can kind of proceed if you're very confident. Please be mindful of slipping. If it's moderate rain or thunderstorm, you need to seek shelter or head to safety because the birds will not be outside and you shouldn't be outside as well. You should be somewhere safe and sheltered. Okay. If it's hazy, as it's been getting a little bit hazy these few weeks, please make sure to follow any suggestions for health guidelines because we don't want any of our volunteers who might have heart conditions or asthma to get affected by this. You might be very eager to bird watch, but if it's hazy on the day itself, please try to stay safe, stay hydrated especially, okay? So another few do's and do nots, keep your volume down. Remember, we're talking about bird calls and all that, so birds are actually very sensitive to noise. We want you to also be mindful of your surroundings and pay attention to where you're walking. Use your binoculars and cameras only when you're stationary because I've had people fall into the pond and end up having wet socks because they looked through the binoculars and they didn't stop while they're walking, even after multiple reminders. So please, please, please be careful when you are bird watching. Do not use your cameras or binoculars unless you are on the spot, okay? Wear appropriate shoes as well. I highly recommend you do not wear flip-flops or slippers. Try to wear covered shoes because even though you're in urban parks and gardens, it's safer that way, especially if you have if you're carrying like a data sheet or looking for stuff, just wear covered shoes. I highly recommend it. So on the do nots list, as I mentioned, birds are very sensitive to sound. Do not use your phone or talk excessively. Do not use callback. So when we play bird call, it's called callback. And it can stress the birds out because sometimes you'll play a call and the bird actually will spend energy to come and fly towards you and see what's going on, even though there's no real bird there. It's also not good because birds have very high metabolisms and they shouldn't be wasting their energy kind of sussing out a source of noise that ultimately is detrimental to it, okay? Also, don't play music when you're outside. A lot of people recently have this habit of like blasting really loud music when they're in parks or gardens, and it's overall not good for the wildlife and not good for the other park users. So try to be mindful of that. Don't be too fixated on one bird and ignore the rest of the birds during your survey. It's 10 minutes, so actually 10 minutes will go by quite fast, especially if there's a lot of birds. If you want to return to bird watch between your survey while you're walking to each site, you can, but do not get too distracted otherwise. Also, don't get distracted by other animals. I mean, this is, if you like animals and you're joining a bird watching survey, you will get distracted by other animals. So I've gotten distracted by a lot of animals while I'm bird watching, especially dogs. If there's a dog nearby, I'm probably going to be like, oh, hi, puppy, and then just get totally distracted. Likewise, if I see monitor lizards, if I see a pretty butterfly, same thing, but try to, at least for this survey period, try to stay focused, okay? And lastly, please do not feed the birds. So feeding wildlife is illegal and you can have a very hefty fine under the Wildlife Act. If you know of anybody feeding birds, don't tell me. First thing you do is tell them that this is a bad thing to do. And if it really gets difficult, you can report on NParks website. So don't feed the birds to attract them. If you see people doing this behavior, we'll ask for a small favor to just take note of it and report it if it's something we suspect is going to be, it is a problem. If you suspect it's a very big problem, please help us a bit, okay? So some things to take note of. We also have some useful resources for you. So first one is review of Garden Bird Watch. So this is basically what our volunteers between 2015 and 2019 collated, and we produced a book out of it. You can download the ebook PDF here. It's not currently available for sale as we have very limited numbers of it, but the PDF is available at high resolution for you to download and use, okay? Another resource is actually sinocanto.org. So I want to stress that as beginners, you don't have to remember all these bird calls, but if you want to explore it as part of your own learning, you can go and explore it. It's quite interesting because I think a lot of the NUS community is very actively involved in the bird research. So you'll maybe see some familiar names on the website. And it's a very useful resource. So it's not affiliated with NParks, it's an international resource, but even us here at NParks, we do use this resource quite often just to bird calls and all that. So yeah, you can go search here. You have to search by advanced search. You can use the location to filter. Birds have different dialects. So a bird in Taiwan and a bird in Singapore, even though it's the same species and near roughly, they will sound totally different. Okay, so some things to note when you're using Sino-Canto. Hopefully you find these two resources are quite useful. And on that note, I want to have a few more parting reminders, which is your site allocation notice and refresher notes. All these will be sent end of March and first week of April. Do check your emails, as we realize some of our emails do end up getting sent to spam, and this because we send via blind carbon copy, and a lot of the email filters will filter these out, but we do that for the safety of our volunteers. So check your spam folder if you haven't heard from us. It might be floating around, our emails might be floating around inside there. Okay, on that note, thank you so much for joining this training session. Our survey period is from 10 to 18 April 2021. And if you have any questions, you can email cin@nparks.gov.sg with the title GBWA 2021. Our filters will basically highlight this, and we'll try to get back to you as fast as possible. Okay, on that note, I believe we'll be leaving the chat open so you can kind of get any other questions out of the way, and I'll pass the microphone over to Amy, who will help round out this session. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sabrina. I'm sure, like me, many of the audience will find your briefing very interesting and engaging. Yeah, we're very grateful for NParks for this partnering with NUS Office of Environmental Sustainability for this bird watch. Just to remind everyone, the practical training session, which was originally scheduled for this Sunday, 28th of March, has been cancelled. Our apologies again, but the actual survey, that means 2 hours in the morning on any one day between 10 to the 18th of April will proceed. So that is the time frame for this garden bird watch. Just answering some of the questions that appeared in the chat group. Yeah. So with this, I think we've come to the end of this training session. We hope that you'll look out for the 2 or more emails coming from NParks with the logistical details, and have an enjoyable, bird watch next month.